Well, I've just introduced to you something called irreducible complexity. In other words, an eye will not function unless it's perfect first time. And I submit to you, Mr. Darwin, that this eye could not possibly have formed by numerous successive slight modifications. No, it had to be perfect first time. Now let's look at the creation of planet Earth. Now this is actually a miracle in itself, another example of irreducible complexity, according to all the parameters that had to be absolutely perfect for life to survive on planet Earth. The temperature, the rotation period, the oxygen content, the carbon dioxide content, the magnetic field, the gravitational field, the food available for mankind, the fresh water available for mankind, the shielding from X-rays and gamma rays from outer space, and lots of other interdependent parameters all have to be absolutely perfect, and there is no variation, there's no possibility of any mistakes. For example, if the Earth was 1% closer to the Sun, all the water would boil. If it's 1% further away, all the water on the planet would freeze. That's just one of literally millions of parameters which actually have to be perfect. That's how God designed it. Now, I told you earlier in this presentation that this planet is young. It's only 6,000 years old. And this is actually supported by science. The Bible clearly states it, but this is also supported by science. We're going to look at the moon now, which actually recedes from the Earth. In other words, it goes away from the Earth by 18 inches every year. There you can see the moon, which is approximately 238,855 miles from the Earth. It actually varies a lot because it's on on an orbit, and the actual distance from the Earth varies. But the point about the moon is its proximity to the Earth causes the tides. I don't know if you can see the moon on the right there. Well, the water that's nearest the moon will simply be pulled towards it by the gravitational field, and then you'll get a high tide where the moon is and a low tide at the North and the South Pole. That's to make it very simple. All right, now there's an inverse square law. I'll just tell you what it says. The force of attraction between two objects is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. That's complicated, but I'll make it simple. It basically means the closer the moon, the higher the tide. Now, the moon is going away, so it used to be closer. The moon is going away, 18 inches a year. It used to be closer, which means that Adam and Eve, 6,000 years ago, there wasn't probably a lot of water on the Earth then, because that was before the flood. But were the tides then, they would be a little bit higher because of the gravitational fields. However, 4 billion years ago, that moon will be much closer to the Earth, which would mean catastrophically high tides, tsunamis twice a day. People will be wiped out by 2-mile-high tides twice a day. It's very difficult for anything to evolve when you're being drowned twice a day. And I'm not trying to be trivial, but this is really a fact. This is a real problem. Now, the Earth is actually slowing down. Everything is going downhill. I told you that. It's due to entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. The Earth is slowing down, and we have to add a leap second every year. At the moment, the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. That's how fast it's spinning. And we've just gone past New Year on the 31st December 2008. And this is what the BBC had to say about it. The New Year arrived this year a tick later. New Year's Eve is proving particularly tricky for the engineers that look after Big Ben, because they're having to introduce an extra second just before midnight. This is what it said on the BBC News on New Year's Eve, 31st December 2008. It said, an extra second to keep the United Kingdom on time. The timekeepers who look after the Big Ben will have to adjust its clock, because a leap second will be added onto official clocks around the world at midnight to account for the Earth's slowing spin on its axis. London's Big Ben, whose bongs bring in the new year across the UK, will have its great clock adjusted. And the BBC will have to add an extra pip to mark the delayed start to 2009. Now, actually, there have been 23 leap seconds that have been introduced since 1972 to keep Greenwich Mean Time, that's internationally defined time, and the Earth's rhythm in synchronization. Now, the International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service, which is the IERS, occasionally adds a leap second to the world's timescale to keep internationally defined time and the Earth's rhythm in synchrony. So there have been 23 leap seconds introduced since 1972, which means that the Earth used to spin faster. It's slowing down, so it used to spin faster. 6,000 years ago, the extra leap seconds means that every 18 months, 6,000 years ago, the extra leap seconds added every 18 months would have meant that the Earth was travelling a little bit faster at the equator. Just maybe, I don't know this is right, but that may be why we now have 365-day years instead of the original 360. I'm not sure if that's right, but that may be. However, big however, 4 billion years ago, the Earth would have been travelling at 5,000 miles an hour at the equator. So even if you survived the tsunamis twice a day, you'd have a major problem because the centrifugal force would cause all the dinosaurs and everything else to be thrown off the Earth by the centrifugal force travelling of the Earth spinning at 5,000 miles an hour. Now the oil wells are all less than 10,000 years old. All the petrol and all the diesel you get for your cars comes from oil wells, which are all young oil wells. How do we know that? Well, oil comes up from the ground, either under the sea or in certain desert parts of the world, and it's under pressure. Oil wells have a pressure up to 20,000 pounds per square inch, and that pressure, according to geologists, the Earth crust can only hold that pressure for less than 10,000 years. So it means that the Earth's crust must be less than 10,000 years old, which is what the Bible says. The Bible says it's 6,000 years old. Now the Sahara Desert has been investigated very carefully and is only 4,000 years old. 4,000 years old, that's all it is, according to the Potsdam Institute for Climate and Impact Research. Let's come back to that slide. If the oldest desert on the planet is only 4,000 years old, why is the oldest desert on the planet so young? Well, you expect it to be younger than the flood, which was 4,400 years ago. Well, guess what? It is. It's the same with the oldest tree on the planet. And this is the oldest tree on the planet. It's called the brittlestone pine, 4,300 years old. There it is. Now, the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of eastern Australia has been dated by the government. And guess what? It's 4,200 years old. It's younger than the flood, which is 4,400 years old. That's how long ago the flood was. And the barrier reef that we know about is younger, and that's what you'd expect. Now, here's something really, really important. The sun is shrinking. 11 million years ago, it would actually be touching the Earth. That may sound astounding to you, but actually that's what the facts actually show. The sun is approximately 93 million miles from the Earth right now. It varies, and the sun is shrinking. It's burning up, and it's losing 5 million tons of matter per second. Now, they've actually carefully plotted the horizontal and vertical axis of the sun ever since 1840. And this is what has been stated by John Eddy and Aram, can't say that long word, in the secular decrease in the solar diameter between 1863 and 1953. And this is what they have to say. Since 1836, more than 100 different observers at the Royal Greenwich Observatory and the US Naval Observatory have made direct visual measurements that suggest that the sun's diameter is shrinking at a rate of about 0.1% each century, or about 5 feet per hour. Now, using those calculations, we can actually work out ourselves that 11 million years ago, the sun would have been touching the Earth. Just say that again. 11 million years ago, the sun would be touching the Earth. So it makes nonsense of the whole idea that the Earth was actually formed by chance 4 billion years ago. The sun would, during the process of touching the Earth, would have absorbed Venus, Mercury, and Earth. Let's look at the oldest calendars in existence. They're all very young. Here's the Hebrew calendar. This year it's 5769. Why is that? Why is the oldest calendar on the planet so young? Why isn't it 4 billion years old or 3 billion years old or whatever? Why is it so young? Well, the answer is because the planet's only 6,000 years old. Here's the Chinese calendar. This year, 2009, is the year 4706 in the Chinese calendar. Why is the Chinese calendar so young? Well, I think it's because the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and you expect all calendars to be much younger than the date of the Earth. And they are. Now, let's look at the dust on the moon. The dust on the moon proves that the moon is less than 10,000 years old. This is actually very interesting. The moon rotates around the Earth, and the Earth rotates around the Sun. So before 1969, there was a great deal of research to determine what the surface of the moon would be like when the lunar module landed. They had no idea what it was going to be like. So they asked all the prominent scientists of the time, what's it going to be like when we get to the moon? And they built their lunar module according to what they thought they would experience when they got there. And they asked various prominent scientists of the time, and one was Littleton, and this is what he said. Littleton felt that X-rays and ultraviolet light striking exposed moon rocks could, during the age of the moon, be sufficient to form a layer over it several miles deep. That's from the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society of London, dated 1955, before the moonshot. Isaac Asimov, this is what he had to say in 1959. He said, "I get a picture, therefore, of the first spaceship picking out a nice level place for landing purposes and coming in slowly downwards, tail first, and sinking majestically out of sight." That's what Isaac Asimov had to say in 1959. Now, the lunar module was designed with special landing pads, you can see them on the right, and very long legs, because they thought they were going to land in something at the moon with miles and miles of dust on the surface of the moon. You see, the thing is that all the nickel on planet Earth comes from cosmic dust, and we do know the rate of precipitation of cosmic dust, and that was how they worked out that the amount of because of the rate of precipitation of cosmic dust on the Earth, they thought that the dust on the moon would be miles and miles deep, and they thought if they constructed their lunar module with great big pads on the end of their very long legs, that the pads would sink into the dust on the moon. And that's what they did. Now, the other thing they did was they actually constructed a very, very short ladder. They did that on purpose. It wasn't a mistake, they did it on purpose. They made it 18 inches too short on purpose because they thought that that pad at the bottom of the long leg there would sink into the dust on the moon, and the astronaut would simply be able to come down the ladder and get off onto the surface of the moon. In other words, they thought that the astronauts on the moon would be something like that. The poor astronauts would have to be very careful and tie themselves on with ropes and things to make sure they didn't sink too deep into the dust. However, when they got there, to their surprise, they found it wasn't like that at all. They found out that their ladder was actually too short by 18 inches. Why was that? Well, the thing was that the dust on the moon wasn't thick at all. It wasn't miles and miles deep. It was half an inch deep. Say that again. It was half an inch deep. There are footprints on the surface of the moon made by Neil Armstrong and his friends. Only half an inch deep. And knowing the rate of precipitation of cosmic dust on planet Earth, we can work out how old the moon is. And guess how old the moon is? Well, it's less than 10,000 years old, which is what you'd expect, because the Bible says that the Earth and the moon and the universe and everything else is less than 10,000 years old. It's actually only 6,000 years old. So when they went to the moon, they actually discovered that the surface of the moon didn't have miles and miles of dust on it as they expected. They found, to their big surprise, in fact, there was only half an inch of dust there, and the moon is actually very young, same as the Earth.